ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ। ਮੈਂ ਨਵਦੀਪ ਰੰਧਾਵਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਅੱਜ ਆਇਆ। ਸਾਡੀ ਰੇਡੀਓ ਸਪਾਈਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਹਰ ਵੀਕ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਵਿਚਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰੀਏ, ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੇਨ ਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਿਸੀਜਨ ਮੇਕਰ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਸਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਲਾਈਨ ਅਪ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਏ ਹਾਂ, ਲਾਈਨ ਅਪ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਵਾਂਗੇ। ਸਾਡੀ ਇਸ ਸਾਰੀ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਲਾਈਵ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਦੇ ਮੰਥਲੀ ਸਲੌਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਨਵਾਂ ਚੈਪਟਰ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਸ ਲਕਸਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਰੇਡੀਓ ਸਪਾਈਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਆਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇਹ ਨੈਚੁਰਲੀ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹੇਗੀ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਬਾਕਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। So we are for the first time this year we are to start an interview series which will be monthly on Radio Spice, discussing community issues and of course the mainstream issues as well. So we formally welcome Chris. Welcome to Radio Spice.
Great to be with you, Navtesh. And I'd have to say, mate, since I last saw you, you've tried to follow my haircut, have you? It looks good.
You may say that. Actually, it's the most economical the way things are in the economy at the moment. We have to cut down on so many of our costs the way this, scenario is unfolding. Indeed, you can say that. So, Chris, it's been a remarkable journey since you took on the leadership role within National. It was the end of the year, and it was a tumultuous time in terms of, how it all panned out, but peacefully and smoothly. So you took on the leadership role, and here we are in 2022, Feb. Polls are showing a totally different story to what it was for National coming to the end of 2021. How do you feel?
Well, look, we're off to a really positive and encouraging start. I mean, as you know, we went through a leadership transition and it was really about, hey, listen, do you want to keep squabbling with each other or do you actually want to focus on New Zealand and New Zealanders? And I have to say, all 33 members of Parliament in the National Party are really talented people. They're really clever, they're smart, they've come from different experiences. We've got them all working on their portfolios and their areas of interest, and so that we can actually oppose the government, but also propose ideas going forward, which is what I think the New Zealand people expect us to do. So, we're off to a good start, and we've got a great team, and the dynamics are really good. But actually, the real focus has to be on New Zealand. And at the moment, we've got, you touched on it with your haircut comment, as a joke. But I mean, the reality is that there is a real cost of living crisis going on at the moment in this country. The cost of living is going up twice as fast as wages. We have a real big challenge with education in this country. Our standards on maths, reading and science have fallen dramatically. You can go through, look at our housing crisis that we've got. It doesn't matter whether you're owning, renting, and looking for a state house or an emergency house. We've got major challenges on all those levels. So really the great thing is, that's what our team's, hooked up to. That's really what they've got to do over the next 18 months before the next election is oppose the government, but not just criticise, but actually have some ideas about how to take the country forward. And if we do that job well, New Zealanders will start to look at us as an alternative government in waiting, and come 2023, put us into government, which is when we can get the change done.
Indeed. Chris, well, just reflecting on the Indian community at large, most of them are double vax. In fact, they are ahead of the curve, 107% for the Indian community at large. And most of them, as you know, do have their ancestral roots back in India, and they are looking forward to making that trip to India. But there is a lot of uncertainty, and that was spoken about in the parliament itself. And just to get a clarity on if National was in power, how would they actually manage the affairs from here on? Because that is something which is a key concern for our community.
Around borders, Navtesh, you mean?
Border opening, yes.
Yeah, it's been, how would I say? I mean, the first thing I'd say is, the government actually did, I thought, quite a good job in 2020, in terms of managing COVID. But in 2021, it turned into an absolute shambles. And that was because we got everything ready in 2020. We were into a good position, but then we wasted the opportunity and we just didn't get things done. We talked about it, but we didn't do it. And as a result, we got a very slow vaccine rollout. We were one of the slowest in the Western world for a long period of time. And when Delta hit, we only had 20% of our country double vaccinated. And as a consequence, then the only choice you were left to do was to put Auckland into a 15-week, $8 billion lockdown. And so again, as Omicron came, we weren't really ready either in terms of, we don't have an extra ICU bed in this country from before COVID to today. We hadn't had these rapid antigen tests available. They'd in fact been banned. They were illegal in New Zealand. So, those sorts of things really do matter, because that actually can change the way in which you can manage and de-risk Omicron and COVID in general. So, that's why we've been so tough on the government on that space, because, bottom line, you can talk about stuff or you can go get it done. And as someone who worked at Unilever and in New Zealand, that's what you do in management. When there's a crisis, you do it in your small businesses. When there's a problem, you go fix it and you make sure it's fixed. And that's been a bit challenging. So from our perspective going forward, we are where we are. The key thing is we wanted MIQ to end and bring Kiwis home, which is really important. Then we need to be able to bring critical and essential workers into the country, because as you well know, we've got shortages across the country and immigration in New Zealand's been a debacle. And then we need to be able to bring in international visitors as quickly as possible. And our challenge to the Prime Minister has been, well, Australia's going to be able to bring in double vaccinated travellers from the 21st of February. We're looking at bringing in Australians and they've got to isolate for 7 days in July, and maybe the rest of the world sort of from October. And so our push and pressure is, why can't we pull that forward and look at that and try and accelerate the time of them being able to open those borders up, but also reduce the isolation periods as well.
Indeed. Chris, I guess in terms of the actual economy, how would, there is, I guess in terms of the economic outlook, this is one of those surveys we had just recently where, close to 50% of New Zealanders feel that the outlook is going to get worse in the coming years. So, and that's a huge question mark. And a lot of our communities actually, small business owners, and that's a major, I guess, worry for them, how the scenario is unfolding. So what would the national team do to address, I guess, these underlying issues, particularly around, giving some comfort to the high rising costs in terms of everything from the petrol to whatnot?
Yeah, so I mean, here's the challenge, right? I mean, this government's only had two economic tools that it's been running the economy with. The first is that it's had a 68% increase in government spending.
Yeah.
So just think about that. Government spending, what the government's spending on everything has gone up 68% in what will be 5 years. So, that's an incredible amount of money to be spending in government spending. And the problem with that is a lot of it's wasteful spending, if I'm honest, and a lot of it, needs to be put on the right places. And when you've got a very, what we call constrained economy, low levels of unemployment, lots of labour shortages, all of that government spending money is competing with the private sector, and it's pushing the prices up and creating inflation. And that inflation becomes a problem because the only tool you have then to suppress inflation is higher interest rates. And so essentially the government's had two tools. One is increase government spending by 68% and keep interest rates really low. And that's what's led to this economy in the way that it actually is. But there's been very little or no pro-business and pro-small business sort of policies put in place that actually is what you need to do properly. And so our real risk and message to the government is, hey, listen, if you don't start to rein in government spending and actually just think about putting it where it must, we're saying spend money, but spend it intelligently and adjust your budgets like you would your household budget or the business, your small business budgets as well, to make sure that you've got some flexibility and you're reining it in now, because if you don't do it now, it's going to be really ugly in 6 or 12 or 18 months' time. And that's essentially their spending is contributing to inflation, which is going to ultimately lead to interest rates. And when interest rates start going up, it's going to be very painful, when you've got high levels of inflation. A lot of our generation won't remember what it was like. I was a kid when we had really high levels of inflation. You talk to your parents and they were buying houses at 18 or 21% interest in mortgage rates. So, and inflation was, strong double digits. And so that's a real challenge. So So that's the macroeconomics. My personal view is the government doesn't care about small business people because essentially in the last year when the economy's been going backwards through COVID, they've thrown a minimum wage increase. I'm all for increasing the minimum wage, but all the research says you do it when the economy is growing strongly at 3 to 4%, and it's really good quality growth. The second thing is they've added an extra public holiday, matariki. They've also then extended sick leave another 5 days. They're talking about now awards. They're talking about adding national insurance, which is a tax of another 3%. And the problem is they sit in Parliament passing all these rules, but none of them are small business people themselves. And so it gets thrown over the fence to the small business owner who might have 7 or 15 employees to try and make sense of it all. But all of a sudden, their costs are diminished. I was in Blenheim recently, and there was a husband and wife team who ran a very simple cafe. And all those costs had added up to $27,000 coming off their bottom line. Well, that was a huge part of their profit and therefore their income. So it's just that inconsistency. They're focused on the macro around interest rates and spending, pumping the economy up. But the reality on the ground for small business people is they're being hit with a lot of costs, a lot of compliance, a lot of regulation. They haven't got any policies that encourage them to export their businesses. They get hit with supply chain challenges in the country. Our ports are inefficient, so the freight costs have gone through the roof. They're not encouraged to create export customers. They're not encouraged to write off their assets, and whether it's new plant and equipment. There's a lot of things you could be doing to really encourage and unleash enterprise, because it's business that creates the jobs and the higher wages and the growth in the economy. It's not the government that does that, right? So that's our challenge with it. And that's why, what's been good is that the public of New Zealand realised that with myself and Simon Bridges, who's going to be a great Minister of Finance and Infrastructure, we are interested. Our economic management, I believe, will be much, much better than these guys.
Yes. Chris, I guess one of the another major issue within our communities of the offshore stuck migrants, especially in India, there's a large number, and also the international students who are not allowed at the moment. How would you address that if National was in charge? Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm hoping we can start to fix through from the beginning of March. That's what we want to hold the government to account. And I have to say, Erica Stanford's done an outstanding job. She's all over the detail here. She's pushing really hard. She's holding the minister to account. She knows all the detail incredibly well. And, it's been very, very pragmatic about what needs to happen to get the system unblocked. But the bottom line is the government was doing a poor job in immigration and was wanting, and to be honest, I think is quite anti-immigration. And was doing that before COVID even hit here. Processing times, visa processing times had doubled in some cases with Immigration New Zealand before this, and then nothing's happened subsequently. So our real hope is that we get that critical essential worker and returning Kiwis and permanent residents and international students all opening up, from my expectation would be from March. And we need those people in the country because they're our doctors, our mechanics, our IT work. There's a whole bunch of shortages that we're seeing across the country. And I guess that's my other challenge to the government has been, well, we've also built a dependency crisis in the country as well, because when you've got low levels of unemployment around low 3%, we've also had 90,000 more Kiwis on a benefit since this government's been created. We've had 50,000 on a job seeker benefit, which is the unemployment benefit, that have been on it for more than a year. So if you can't get people off welfare into work at this time when the economy is growing, we've got low unemployment and there's lots of job vacancies. That's another problem that the government really has to deal with as well. Because if you can't move people from welfare to work today, when will you do it? Quite a few things to work through, but that's the work of the coming year.
Indeed. And one of the questions come through, Chris, there is another, I guess a stifling challenge within the community about the parent category as well, the bringing the parents through to New Zealand, and that's been put on hold for a very long time. So, how does National sees that in the coming years?
Yeah, well, look, there's some real challenges with it, right? Because it's the way it was working may or may not have been working. I think it was National and Labor government sort of had that view a little bit. But again, Erica's been looking at that quite closely, and there is ways in which we could deal with that in terms of either extension of time. We know how important those parent visas are, particularly for support to the Indian community specifically. And that's important. But, if you look at what Canada's been doing around that, they've been a lot more flexible about it. And so I won't go into the detail here, but suffice to say that's, Erica's all over that again and has been doing a great job of thinking through the kind of things that we could do to actually make that work much better, so that you can actually have parents maybe here for longer for more support as well. So there's a lot of issues to work through on the immigration front, and I appreciate it's difficult because everyone's got their own interests in the conversation. The trick on immigration is we need to make sure that it's very strongly linked to our economic agenda. And when you have it like it is in Canada and in New Zealand historically, then you get very good support from New Zealand citizens to say, hey, immigration is a good thing. When you don't link it to the economic agenda, you end up then more like we see in America and other places where you then lose the public support for immigration and migrants coming to the country. And we don't ever want to be at that place. We want to be pro-migrants, pro-immigration, because when we want to be the best at it, because we want to attract the best people here, right? And we know how much better the country is by virtue of having New Zealanders come here. I mean, the Indian community is a classic. I've known the Indian community well because of my days at Unilever or Hindustan Lever, and have visited many times. The talent's immense. The contribution's been fantastic. The fact that you leave your home, your country, your friends, your family, your language, come out here. I've seen how hard you work to get that, 2 or 3 jobs to get your first home or the first business. It's just so inspiring. I mean, and that's what we want to see all New Zealanders. You'd be such a role model for the rest of the country, in terms of how you do it. So, there's a lot to do, right? But we want to make sure that we link that agenda. If you link immigration largely through to the economic agenda, it can really support. We can do a lot. We can get the public support for it. And then make sure the companion pieces, make sure we build the infrastructure, make sure we've got the schools, the houses, all the things that can support, good levels of immigration.
Chris, I guess there's a major concern in terms of the quarantine, challenges a lot of business owners are facing. I actually, in fact, got one of, viewers who's actually a business owner, and she had her restaurant shut down because one of the visitors became positive, and didn't really matter that the people on the other side of the counter actually had enough distance, were wearing the mask, but the entire team had to close down. And she's overseas, in fact, visiting the family, and you can imagine the ordeal, how it played out, and the loss of income was just tremendous. But now there are a lot of people who are starting, what you said in one of your comments as well, they are stopping checking themselves into a lot of these places, being afraid that they don't want to be the person being called on the phone and said, what, you're going to be actually quarantined for 10 days and there is not much replacement coming through. How this can be better managed, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. When you look at the benefit that New Zealand has, is that we have time, because essentially we get to see what's happened in other parts of the world. So we've seen what's happened with Omicron around Australia. We've seen what's happened in the UK and other countries around the world with it. And essentially that isolation period becomes, first and foremost, the definition of a close contact. The Australians have got it pretty well defined in terms of, what it is and what it isn't. So you're not isolating people that don't, fundamentally are a risk. The second thing is making sure the isolation periods are much shorter. So if you've got a situation where you are a case, you're isolating for 14 days. If you've then got a close contact, that's another 10 days. So you could be 24 days if you're a close contact of someone who gets COVID in your household or whatever. And that's a big disincentive for people to go get tested, to actually declare. And that's not what we want. That's not what we want. We need people to be doing the right thing. So our argument has been, why don't we just make it 7 days, as a case, and shorten the isolation period. I think the Brits and the Americans are at 5 days. But then you get very quickly, even then, you can still run into challenges around supply chains if you think about the trucking industry or all those sorts of businesses. And so that's why this thing called rapid antigen tests is so important, because then you can test to work. So if you're asymptomatic, you pass a rapid antigen test, then that's good. You should go back into, you should be able to get back to work as quickly as possible. And so rapid antigen tests are really available in every other country around the world. If you feel you're at risk or a close contact, or you actually just want to go see your grandmother who's elderly tonight for dinner, and you can go to a vending machine in Singapore, get a rapid antigen test, do a test, find out in 30 minutes, upload that very quickly to your app. And as a result, you know whether you're good to go or not good to go back to work, good to go, go visit someone who's a higher risk person, like a senior or an elderly person. So that's why we've been so frustrated with these rapid antigen tests, because the government actually banned them and made them illegal up until we started putting some pressure in, because for some weird ideological reason, even though they've been available everywhere. But the benefit would be, in New South Wales, the kids get tested twice a week. The teachers and staff get tested twice a week with a lollipop version of this test, just to identify who's getting Omicron and who isn't. So the benefit is then you've got personal responsibility rather than a government system that's sort of not working very efficiently. People take responsibility for their own health and manage it much better as a result. And then you get less disruption in the community and the supply chains, because you've got this definition of what's a critical worker is quite broad rather than narrow is what you want. And then you've got rapid antigen tests. So that's what I was talking about before, about getting things done properly and making sure that the solutions are in place rather than just talking about this stuff.
Indeed. Chris, just on that, in terms of modelling, announcements that are coming through, which are just, numbers which are, I guess, baffling, just to say the least, when it comes to, what could be the worst case scenario. And one of the key challenge as a country we're facing is around the ICU beds and also the hospital capacity in terms of the healthcare system. So how could that be addressed as a national policy?
Well, look, this Omicron variant we know is highly transmissible and very contagious. And so it actually goes through vaccines as well in terms of the contagion part of it. But there's no doubt about it, if you're double vaccinated and boosted, that is really good in terms of the severity of what can happen to you. Is the risk is just night and day different, like really, really different. And your therefore chances of getting really sick and ending up in hospital is actually really, diminished a lot if you get that double vaccine and boosted. So I just say to everyone, and I know the Indian community has been very good at it actually, in part because you've seen what's happened back at home in India. You've been really early adopters of it and had really high levels of vaccination. Just if there's anyone in your community that hasn't done that, encourage them to do so, because that's their personal protection against this thing. But then, I think then we've got to then build the mitigations or the risks and redundancies into the system. And I used to run an airline in New Zealand as CEO, and you build in a lot of redundancies and safety measures and to de-risk defying gravity and flying airplanes. And so it's the same here. Why wouldn't we have and build staffed ICU capacity? We haven't built an extra ICU bed since this whole thing started. Well, I think New South Wales doubled it. We have the lowest level of ICU beds per capita, just ahead of Mexico. So, we're not in great shape here. And it doesn't matter. We would hope we would never need to use it if we've got good levels of vaccination and the severity doesn't kick in. But the bottom line is it's actually just another insurance policy to have that capability in place. We know that if you look at our healthcare system versus the Australian system, we're about 12,000 nurses short. We're about 1,500 doctors short and hospital specialists, just in order to have the same standard of doctors and nurses to patients. So, there's quite a lot of, those are sorts of things you just want to be working on, to have that all in place so that we can de-risk it, should it get away from us. Seem to have lost you, Navtesh. Well, everyone, I'm not sure where the host has gone, but if he's shot through or we've lost him in the technology, can I just say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for what you do in the Indian community. It is a really awesome community that we should be very, very proud about, and the contribution to New Zealand has been really immense and continues to do so. And can I just say thank you for your time today? I really appreciate it.